Chapter 64. Choosing Futures. A few days later.
Ready or not, here I come!
BB's voice loudly declared before he came out from the basement, his eyes wide and sweeping across the living room of the house. Eventide and Lancia stood off to one side, watching the little guy speed through the house on buzzing wings, searching for his hiding mother. It was almost noon, and the light of the summer sun was pouring in through the windows. It had rained the previous night and into the early hours of sunrise, leaving numerous puddles scattered across the still damp world. After a few minutes of merely watching BB hunt for his target, Lancia gave a snort of amusement.
Do you think he knows that changelings can turn into non-living things?
He asked under his breath, shooting Eventide a sideways look. He blinked and looked down at Lancia, disbelieving. For real? Lancia nodded with a coy smirk.
Yep. Takes less power, but it's a lot more uncomfortable. Let me tell you, being a big boulder is...
He rubbed the back of his head and winced as if remembering something painful.
My neck wasn't the same for a few days.
Eventide stared at Lancia for a good few moments before chuckling and shaking his head.
No, we did not know that. BB never even tried to turn into something inanimate.
As if on cue, BB came back into the room, floating in the center and spinning in a slow circle.
Mom? Where'd you go?
He called before disappearing back down into the basement.
Well, at least he's having fun,
Eventide noted, leaning back casually against the wall.
I don't think I've seen him have this much fun over the course of a single week since he was less than a year old.
BB came flying back up and landed on the backrest of the couch, his eyes narrowing as he examined the home.
Okay, I give up, Mom. You can come out now.
On cue, a subtly hidden copy of the television remote right below him exploded into green flames, making BB leap back off the couch with a startled shriek. When the flames parted, Clypeus was revealed to be laying there on her back, her forelegs curled up over her chest and a playful smile on her face.
Hey, BB.
His eyes widened in shock.
What? But how did you... What?
He babbled before flying down so his muzzle was right up against hers.
Hey, that's not fair. You cheated. Did I?
Clypeus shot back, before reaching up with her hooves and tugging him down against her chest in an affectionate embrace.
You never said I couldn't turn into a remote. When I didn't even know you could.
He complained, pouting, despite returning the embrace.
That's not fair. How was I supposed to know that you didn't know about turning into objects? But
BB sat up on her chest to throw his forelegs up into the air in an exasperation, before allowing himself to fall limply into her waiting hooves again. Clypeus giggled at his adorable childish frustration, and leaned down to nuzzle him on top of the head. After a few seconds, BB's indignation faded away, and he gratefully returned the nuzzle. With disaster averted, Clypeus placed her muzzle next to his ear to whisper to him,
Would you like me to teach you how to do it?
That question caused BB to sit bolt upright, his eyes wide with anticipation.
Oh, yes, please,
he chirped, clapping his hooves together over his muzzle. With a giggle, Clypeus nudged him off and sat up on the couch so they were side by side.
Okay. Well, it's not so different from changing into an animal or some other creature, really. You just need to remember the properties of the object rather than the anatomy of the creature. So, for example, if you wanted to turn into a rock, I'd be hard and pointy,
BB ventured, earning an approving nod from his mother.
Exactly. Give it a try.
BB closed his eyes, his horn lighting up. Then, in a swirl of flames, he was gone. In his place was a plain gray rock, about the size of a chihuahua. It was heavy, though, and immediately caused the cushions on the couch to creak in protest as they all but imploded under it. Eventide's eyes widened. "Well, hey, mind the couch?" he called, stepping away from the wall and uncrossing his arms. Another swirl of flames later, BB returned, blinking a few times.
Oh.
He groaned before shaking his head.
Ow, that felt weird.
Told ya. Lancia remarked under his breath as Eventide began to relax. After rubbing his now stiff neck for a second, BB grinned massively at Clypeus and lunged forward to hug her tight around the neck.
I did it, Mom! I did it!
He cheered. She returned the hug gladly, chuckling at his jubilation.
Yes, you did. And you did very well.
She congratulated before nudging him back to look into his eyes.
How many more things can you teach me?
BB inquired while shifting to lean against her side. She draped one of her forelegs over his shoulders and pulled him closer, her eyes going distant.
Oh, so many things. Our magic can do a lot more than lift things or change shapes, you know. We can make barriers, change the properties of an object, and so many other wonderful things.
BB closed his eyes, purring quietly in his throat. The dreamy look on his face gave the impression of a creature picturing everything that was being said to him.
Wow. I want to learn it all.
Eventide felt his arm warm up for the millionth time this week at the sight. However, before he had the chance to make a comment on it, something moving in the corner of his eye caught his attention. Frowning, he leaned over to look. His heart fell lower into his stomach when he saw Sunset's car pulling up into the driveway, the fiery-haired woman herself hiding behind the wheel. Of course. It was time for Clypeus and Lancia to return to Equestria. Eventide sighed in disappointment before turning back to the cuddling duo of bugs on the couch. Hey, I hate to break it to you two, but more lessons will have to wait until next time. Sunset's here. Clypeus? Lancia? All ears in the room fell to rest flat against chitin-clad heads.
Already?
BB demanded, before cuddling closer to Clypeus.
I don't want them to go yet.
Clypeus sighed and reached a hoof over to lightly pat him on the back of the head.
We don't want to go either, BB. But we know where to find you now. We can come back and see you again. And maybe...
Her eyes drifted over to Lancia.
Maybe you can come see us too.
Eventide nodded slowly, an apologetic look in his eyes. I'm sorry, guys. Believe me, if I had my way, you could stay here as long as you wanted. But the magic expert and the princess have ordered otherwise. Not much I can really do to argue about that. It's fine. Lancia waved him off before giving him a small smile. Thanks for having us. It's been wonderful.
Yes, it has,
Clypeus added, sliding off the couch. BB followed her down, his eyes turned to the ground. Eventide almost couldn't bring himself to look at the sad sight. After a second, he turned and opened the front door. You guys want or need anything else before you go? He asked, his eyes finding Clypeus again. BB suddenly perked up.
Oh, I want to give him something. Hold on.
He shouted before turning and vanishing down into the basement in a flurry of buzzing wings. A moment later, he returned with a certain children's book clutched in his hooves. Eventide smiled. Clypeus raised an eyebrow as her son presented it to her eyes tracing over the title.
Pete the Big Green Dragon? BB, what's this? My favorite book.
BB replied with a smile. He flipped it around and opened it up to the first page.
It means a lot to me. And it really helped me feel like I belonged here when I was still really, really little. Dad used to read it to me to make me feel welcome, and that I belonged even though I was adopted.
He then closed the book and held it out to Clypeus again.
I want you to have it.
Her eyes went wide as dinner plates, her mouth hanging open.
What? BB,
He nodded at her.
Go on. Take it. I just want you to promise me that you'll bring it back next time you come to visit. And then I'll lend you some other gift. So that I always have to come back.
Clypeus breathed in realization, gingerly taking the book in her hooves. Her horns sparked into life and flipped it open to go through the pages, her eyes scanning every line. A smile appeared on her face before she gently closed it. She leaned forward and pulled BB in for another hug.
You're such a smart nymph. I'll bring this back to you. I promise. Good,
he replied, returning the hug and giving her a tight squeeze.
I love you, Mom.
Time seemed to stop for everyone present as those words fled his lips. Everyone was utterly silent, the only sound coming from the leaves of trees rustling outside the house. After a few seconds, Clypeus gave off a quiet sob, her eyes screwing themselves shut.
I love you too, BB.
He chirped happily as he heard those words, his wings buzzing briefly on his back before folding up to disappear under his shell again. Gradually, the hug came undone, the two of them smiling sadly into each other's eyes. Lancia chose this moment to step forward, joining his family in the embrace. After a moment, though, he leaned back and looked into his mate's eyes. We should get a move on. Clippy, why don't you go down to the car? I'll be down in just a minute. Clypeus looked at the ground for a second, then nodded. She stood up and made her way for the door. Before she'd gone very far, though, Lancia turned to BB and spoke to him. Why don't you go with her? Keep her company until I'm ready. BB tilted his head, then looked past Lancia at Eventide to silently ask for permission. It came in the form of an equally silent nod of the man's head. BB smiled at his adoptive father, then cantered over to Trump by Clypeus' side, the two of them disappearing through the front door. Once they were gone, Eventide turned to look at the only remaining bug in the house, looked into his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest. What's up, Lancia? The brown-colored changeling looked down for a second, his face twisted as if he were struggling with something in his mind. Then he sighed and looked up again. I'm just going to cut to the chase here, Eventide. Clypeus and I were talking about it while trying to get some sleep last night, and we want BB to come back to Equestria with us. Eventide blinked, several protective instincts flaring into life inside of him at that moment. He was quick to kick them into submission, though. He took a deep breath through his nose, keeping his expression neutral. Not surprised? But, Lancia continued, his ears drooping, we're not blind. We can literally see how much you two love each other and how happy he is. And in the end, no matter how much we want him to come and live with us, more than anything else, we want what's best for our son. He started to trot forwards, his eyes downturned. And the fact of the matter is, you have known BB for a lot longer than we have. He is your son just as much as he is ours, if not more, and you've been a good father to him. It would be foolish and short-sighted of us to ask you to give him to us just like that. I will not willfully jeopardize my son's happiness for anything, and... Lancia sighed, his gaze drifting out to stare after his mate and son. And if you think he'd be better off with you than with us, I'm willing to believe your judgment and leave him with you. Eventide recoiled, taken aback. That was not where he had been expecting this conversation to go. He awkwardly rubbed at the back of his head as he fished for something to say in response. Well, I don't know, he finally mumbled. Lancia raised an eyebrow.
You don't know?
Eventide shrugged. I don't. I mean, yeah, I've known him since he hatched, and we have a routine that works. We're comfy and we're happy. And if he went with you, a lot of that would be uprooted. Plus, He shuddered at the mere thought, his hand falling from his head. It would mean having to say goodbye to him.
So, does that mean you think he'd be better off with you?
Lancia asked, his voice displaying his disappointment. Eventide was quick to correct him. Not necessarily. I want what's best for him too, and... He let his head lean back until he was staring up at the ceiling. I don't know if staying with me is for the best. He has to live in hiding for most of his time here. And as happy as we are, there are so many things in life that he'll never get to experience here on Earth. He'll never be able to get a job. He'll probably never be able to move out of my house. The number of friends he can have is obscenely limited. No matter how happy he is, or how familiar with life here he is, he'll always be something of a prisoner. Because of what he is. Lancia nodded in understanding.
I see.
But if he went with you, Eventide continued, he'd be in the world he was born to live in. He won't have to hide all the time. He can just be himself and be with his own kind. But at the same time, he'd have to learn all about an entirely different world. And he'd have to leave me, Buddha, and Fluttershy. I'd go with him and live in Equestria with you guys if I could, but I have way too many things tying me down here. I have my parents who I've only just patched things up with a year or so ago after a long falling out, and I can't go walking out on them like that. Not again. I have a lot of friends here who would miss me if I just disappeared. And... Eventide bit his lip, his arms curling together over his chest. And Fluttershy. I can't leave her. I gotta stay here, no matter what. Lancia nodded again, his muzzle scrunching up in thought.
Well then, what do you propose we do? It sounds like no matter what, BB will have challenges to face moving forward.
A somber silence fell over the room as Eventide got his thoughts in order. He ran over each possibility in his head several times before at last, an idea came to him. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he had. With a sigh, he opened his eyes and looked into Lancia's. I'll talk to him once you guys go. I'll explain the pros and the cons of staying with me versus going with you, and then I'll let him choose. Lancia looked surprised by that decision, but after a moment of thinking it over, his face softened into an understanding smile.
All right. That's probably the best thing we can hope for. BB is a smart little guy. Just make sure you explain everything to him. As clever as he is still a child, and this is a big decision. He can't afford to be underinformed.
I know, Eventide replied, before getting down onto one knee and holding out a hand. I'll do my best, and I'll have Sunset get word to you when he makes his choice. I promise. Lancia reached up and placed his hoof into the palm of Eventide's hand. They shook.
I'll hold you to that.
The two fell into one more silence, allowing the weight of the arrangement to set in. Then, with a breath, Eventide released Lancia's hoof and stood back up. All right. You need to get a move on. Clippius is waiting for you, and I need to get talking with our son. Lancia met Eventide's gaze for a moment, then bowed his head low to the ground.
Farewell, Eventide. And again, thank you Thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking care of BB for us,"
he said, before smiling up at the man and trotting by him and out the door. Eventide turned to watch him go, leaning in the doorframe. He watched Lancia come up to Callippius' side, the both of them taking turns to give BB one more long hug each before hopping up into Sunset's car. The engine came into life a minute later, and the car began to make its exit. As it left, BB remained planted in the driveway, just watching it go. Even from this distance, Eventide could make out Callippius and Lancia looking back at their son through the back windscreen, their hooves on the glass. The car rounded a bend, and BB's parents disappeared from view. A gentle breeze washed over the driveway, sending some stray dirt and dust drifting by. BB remained utterly still for a long time. He took a small step forward, as if he wanted to follow the vehicle, but he thought better of it and fell still again. Eventide watched him for almost a minute, before leaving the doorway to approach, moving slowly and quietly. "BB? You okay, kiddo?" he called in a ginger voice once he was a few feet away. The bug turned back to him, then looked down at the ground.
"I don't want them to go yet,"
he whispered sadly, his ears drooping. "I know, Bee," Eventide replied gently, before stepping up to him. He crouched down and put his hand on the back of his son's head. "But we'll see them again. Maybe sooner than you think." BB blinked and looked up into his father's eyes curiously.
"Huh? What do you mean?"
Without a word, Eventide scooped BB up into his arms and began to carry him back to the house. "Come on, BB. We need to talk." With those words, he stepped back into the house and closed the door behind him.